Welcome everyone to another really exciting BAD online event. My name is Catherine Dupeloux-Menager and I'm the Artistic Director of BAD Sydney. I'd like to begin by acknowledging traditional owners of country throughout Australia. We recognise their continuing connection to land, to waters and to culture, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. I'm speaking to you today from Camaragal country. We have a huge treat tonight to be able to hear not one writer, but two, writing as one or writing as two, Lee and Andrew Child, talking about their latest book, No Plan B. Here is my very well-thumbed copy. Given that apparently a Reacher book is sold on average every 9 seconds, wherever in the world, in whatever language, it's unlikely that anybody here won't have read at least one of them. But I've got a good story. The son of someone I know got COVID this week. He's not very ill, so that's fine. But he's started at Reacher 1 and he's working his way through. So he spent the week in bed with Reacher, which, you know, could be worse places to be or worse things to do. Now, the interviewer today is Tim Ayliffe. Now, Tim's a great person to interview because not only is he a journo, so he knows how to ask questions, but he's also a thriller writer himself, although he hasn't quite got your rather formidable tally, gentlemen. He's, I think, on number 5, but he'll get there. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the City of Sydney and Create New South Wales, without whom we wouldn't be here. When we're live, the State Library of New South Wales helps us hugely as well with our in-person festival. Booktopia is our online bookseller, so that's where you go to get all your Reacher books. All the members of the BAD community who are joining us today, welcome, and in particular to people who are joining us courtesy of the libraries throughout the state. It's always great to have you with us. So what are we going to do now? I'm going to stop talking in a moment, hand over to Tim. He'll ask his list of incisive questions, and some of you are also already sent in questions. So Tim will be asking those as well. We'll go for just under an hour, and I'll come back at the end to say goodbye. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and let's go, Tim.
Thanks so much, Catherine. So excited to be able to meet you, Lee and Andrew. We've got, I'm coming to you from Sydney, which is Gadigal country, and I know Lee, g'day, in Colorado.
Yep, hi.
And Andrew, you're in London.
I am. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, congratulations both on another great book. The latest one, No Plan B. It really felt like classic Reacher for me. The dogged sort of military cop, back being the investigator like he used to be, way back before we first met him in The Killing Floor. How would you describe this book for your readers? Andrew. Well, yeah, sorry, go Andrew first. He's biggest on my screen, so sorry.
Yeah, well, I love your description. I love your introduction, actually. Classic Reacher. I mean, for me, being, this is the third one I've worked on with Lee, there couldn't be a bigger compliment than somebody saying it was classic Reacher, because I love Reacher. I've loved Reacher for more than 25 years, so that is music to my ears. So yeah, in this book, Reacher is he starts out in a small town in Colorado, and he sees there's a group of people watching a horrible incident. A woman gets hit by a bus and killed, and everybody else that sees it thinks that it was suicide, thinks that she jumped in front of the bus. Reacher, however, saw that in fact she was pushed, and so when he realizes that an innocent woman has lost her life, police aren't interested in investigating. They're taking the easy way out, going with the suicide idea. Reacher is compelled to investigate. So he starts off in Colorado, works his way almost all the way across the United States to Mississippi, and he puts things right in a way that only Reacher can.
Felt a bit controversial going to the little brother then first, actually. So about Lee, how was this book for you?
It was the third that we've worked together on, although I got a really
try and make the point that, in a way, we've worked on all of them together, in the sense that, you know, Andrew is the only other natural thriller reader in my family. And so when I wrote the first one, Killing Floor, when it was still a pencil manuscript, I sent it to him in order to get an opinion, and which he gave me. And then subsequently, as I was writing the next 23 or whatever it was always involved, always there. So it's kind of important to make the point that, yeah, this is a collaboration. It's a 4-book exercise where we transfer Reacher from me to him. We're doing 4 together to kind of blend. You know, it's not something new. It's not a departure. It's not. It hasn't required a great amount of education on Andrew's point of view, because it's been there since the start. And I think, in a way, that's what's made it so much fun for us. And it's now really showing up. No Plan B, I think, is that they've all been different. The 3 that we've done together, in a way, different techniques, in a way, different purposes. And this one, I think, is, as you say, classic Reacher, because it was done with my classic Reacher method, which is to not think about it too much. Just start out with some kind of compelling thing at the beginning. And as Andrew said, it's a woman being killed by a bus, where most eyewitnesses think it was suicide. Reacher has a different opinion. So we got that down, and then it was a question of, all right, what's next? Then what's after that? What comes next? What's next? What's next? That's the way I always used to work, and we really nailed that in this one. And for me, I think it's my favorite of the 3 that we've done together.
Oh, good one. And ask another question on that process. I want to actually talk about the process a little bit, but did you start on September the 1st?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That is, you know, that was the historic date that I started the first one. And then, as you know, if you're going to do a book a year, you've got to write a book a year. And therefore, it seemed to make sense to me to always start on September the 1st, so that I was organized. And it's become, yeah, a tradition. And we never talk about it in August. It's always the 1st of September that, you know, we start, all right, what are we going to do? And we've just started that process, obviously, for next year's book. And so, yeah, so it's a lovely feeling. Working with my brother is a great thing. And but unfortunately, the plan is he forges on ahead. I slide backward into the shadows, and I'm going to miss it.
So let's talk a little bit about the process. So how does it work? September 1, you're both sitting in front of computers. You pick up the phone. Let's give us a bit of an understanding and a feel for how this collaboration's working.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much, it starts out talking, because what we try and do is come up with with a feel for the book. You know, what do we want it to feel like? Is it going to be an angry book? Is it going to be a relentless book? You know, is it going to be a book about, you know, some egregious wrong that has to be corrected? Is it going to be a mystery that has to be unraveled? So we start out talking about what kind of book do we want it to be. And when we did the first one together, The Sentinel, that was pre-COVID, so we actually sat in the same room. Lee came over to my place and we sat together and we kind of thrashed a lot of this stuff out face to face. But then COVID came, we'd been traveling, it was hard to get together, so we started doing everything remotely. And we found it worked really well, because a lot of the process, as Lee was saying, it's about, well, what happens next? What comes next? And if you are sitting down next to each other in the room and you're showing the other person something you've written, you just can't help yourself. You're going to say, okay, this is what I've done. This is why. This is how it connects to what was before. This is what it's going to lead to. This is why I think it's important. This is the bit I really like about it. This is the bit I'm not sure about. You can't help but saying those things. And then when the other person's heard them, you know, you can't unhear those words. So when you read what's on the page, inevitably you're responding to it through the lens of what you've heard. And that's different to how somebody is going to interpret those words if they just pick up the book and just have the words on the page. So when we started emailing stuff back and forth with none of that introduction and none of that justification, with just the words on the page to either stand on their own or fall if they weren't right, it actually was quicker, and I think it was a more powerful process because we immediately knew whether we were on the right lines or whether we needed to change stuff.
How about you, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, I totally back that up. Talking is essential at the beginning. It's all about, as it's the mood, the feel, the temperature, the smell, just that the DNA of the book. We need to thrash that out. But then the actual text itself, it has to survive. It has to stand alone. You know, 5 years from now, let's hope, 10 years from now, somebody in Thailand or somebody passing through Sydney, perhaps, is going to pick up a battered old paperback, and all they've got is the words. And so we found that incredibly valuable, that all we were communicating with was the actual text. It either worked or it didn't. And that is vulnerable. You know, you are vulnerable about it. That normally when you're writing a book, there's going to be a couple of lines that are awful. There's going to be, you try something that totally doesn't work. You put in a line that completely misses. And normally, when it's private to you, nobody else knows about that. Nobody knows what an idiot and a crap writer you were. It's just because you change it afterwards, and all that anybody sees is the end result. But it is a little vulnerable, trading back and forth things that are slightly half-formed, not yet perfect, and showing each other's mistakes. It is it's an intimate and vulnerable process, and I wasn't sure how I would like it, but actually we've done fine with it. And it saves a lot of time in the end, because I don't know about you, but for me, I write the line, I'm very reluctant to take it out or change it, because I feel that's a waste. You know, it's a waste of something you got there. You were 10 steps towards the goal, and now you're going to restart. I didn't like that feeling. So I would preserve the bad stuff until I'd gotten to the end of the book and it was long enough and it was good enough. And then I would go back and take it out. And it added a lot of time to the process. But doing it together, if I write a bad line or come up with a stupid idea, he'll just say, no, that's stupid. And in the moment, I'm incandescent with rage, but it does actually save a lot of time in the long run.
And there's something quite unique, I think, and I think part of the success of the Reacher books is the rhythm of the writing. The books have their own rhythm. It's a really sometimes very short, sharp, powerful sentences. Andrew, a question for you on that. Were you sort of learning, I guess, you know, your brother's punchy style that really has helped us to love the Reacher character? Was that something you found challenging or something you've enjoyed?
You know, that's a really, really good question, because that goes really to the heart of how Reacher books work. You know, people, I think, over the years haven't given Lee the credit he deserves, because a Reacher book is like a machine. It's like a production line on a factory floor. You know, at the beginning, it grabs hold of the reader and it keeps them in its grip, and it takes them right through the process and does not let go until the climax. And that is not an easy thing to do. And it doesn't happen by accident. It happens and it works because of the specific words that are chosen and the way they're put together. So it's really, really critical to get that right. And it was a challenge because, you know, I'd written 9 books on my own before I started working with Lee. And I was trying very hard during all of those years to not sound anything like him, because I didn't want people to associate, you know, I wanted them to sound like my books, not like his. And so it certainly took a big effort and a lot of concentration and a lot of effort to do that 180-degree turn. And so instead of deliberately not sounding like Lee to make sure to sound as much like Lee as possible. And you know, there's an art to it. There's a way that the sentences and the paragraphs and the chapters work. And I think one of the things that made writing No Plan B easier and smoother and more enjoyable for us is that, you know, I've adjusted, you know, a little bit more each time that we've done this. So I was finding that this time around, I was having to rework the sentences that I wrote less often than I had done in some of the earlier books, you know, because you have to make them sound right. You know, it's like chiseling away at a piece of marble. You have to get it to the right shape, the right size. You have to have it connect to the other pieces properly, and that doesn't happen overnight. So yeah, one of the things that made this one more of a pleasure to write, I think, was that I was slipping into that process better than I had been previously.
How about you, Lee? You're still writing, in the writing process. How's that, I guess, working with your younger brother on, hey, this is how these Reacher books kind of work. How's that process been for you?
It was surprisingly painless because, like I said, he's certainly been reading them from the start, but also involved in a way that is very important. Was very important to me. You know, he was a natural thriller reader and then became a thriller writer, and that was key to me. That finally I had another writer that I could relate to on a daily basis, who understood what it was like. And Andrew's wife, Tasha Alexander, my sister-in-law, she's also a writer. So for me, that was a little paradise. We would get together, the three of us, and the sort of concerns that you obsess about as a writer, which no other person wants to hear about. They don't care. They're not interested. They think you're stupid for worrying about where does a comma go? Should you use a one-syllable word here instead of a two-syllable? What's better for the rhythm? All that kind of stuff. Nobody else cares about that. But when you're with other writers, they do care about it. So it was, in a way, kind of, in an abstruse way, collaborative from the beginning. I was at home amongst writers. And then for Andrew to move in and start doing it seemed fairly natural. And we didn't really have any big controversies. There were no big arguments about it. I was happy for him that, because we're very similar people. And as he said, he wanted his own books previously to be recognizably his own. And he certainly did not want to think he was on my coattails. And so in a way, he had to be different by choice, where naturally he would want to be fairly similar. And so it was like he could relax and just do what he wanted to do and make it sound like Reacher, which I think No Plan B is magnificent from that point of view. I guarantee that nobody is going to tell which lines I wrote and which lines he wrote. It's having looked at the final product, it's seamless. Nobody will be able to tell any division in it.
Yeah, I was stewing over how to describe this one, and I did really honestly feel like it was that classic Reacher. So I think you've hit your sweet spot, and you've got one more to go together. If you're doing a 4-book sort of co-writing handover, so you're into the 4th at the moment. How's that feel? Is this like saying it out loud like that? That's quite big. I mean, how are you both feeling about that?
I'm feeling great about it, you know, because what I wanted to do, this goes back a long time for me, which was, I mean, literally a lifetime ago for me, when I became a reader. And I loved reading. I'm very old now, so you got to remember, this is a long time ago, and there was not much else to do other than read. Reading saved my life. It totally did. You know, I grew up in a narrow, gray, post-war, provincial English situation. Everything was pinched and mean. And for a person like me, a realistic life ahead of me was just nothing. It was going to be some kind of daily grind, and then you retire and you die. you know, just that awful sort of life that people had to go through back then. And so the idea that books could get you out of that, you know, certainly in your leisure time, you could read, and you could be at any point in history, you could be anywhere in the world, you could be any person you wanted to be, depending on the book that you had. So I was a voracious reader, always, but I would get disappointed sometimes and annoyed where you had a favorite author, or particularly a favorite series, and there could be 20 or 30 books on the library shelf, and you would start with the first one and you would love it, and the second one and the third one and the fourth one, and you were just so happy about it. And then too many times you would find the author became lazy or disengaged or just ran out of gas and started phoning it in and giving the reader a second-rate product. And I hated that as a reader. So when I became a writer, I made myself a promise that I would be hyper alert to the point where I myself was going to run out of gas, that I would pay close attention to it and stop, rather than give my lovely readers who have been with me for so long, I would absolutely refuse to give them a second-rate phoned-in product. And that point came, you know, a couple of years ago. I just thought, I am running out of energy. I don't have the stamina and the ideas that I used to have. It's going to grind to a halt. I can't keep this going. It will be a second-rate product if I do. So I was going to stop. I just thought the honest thing to do, honoring that promise that I've made myself 25 years previously, would be just to say enough is enough. That is it. That's all I can do. That's the end of the series. But, you know, the Reacher thing just got out of control. People love the guy. People want the books. They want the new book every year. And I was very upset and sad, really, that I was going to have to stop doing it and leave them disappointed, which is then when I got the idea that Andrew should hopefully take over. Not that that was a given, not at all, because he was doing some great stuff at the time. I remember it, ironically, the period when I was thinking about asking him, he was doing some of his best stuff that I was loving to read. And I was a little reluctant to ask him because selfishly as a reader, I wanted his books to keep coming. So, but it does mean the Reacher will continue with passion, with energy, with ideas, and in a way that I couldn't do anymore.
Andrew, how about you? It's you know, doing this with your big brothers is quite cool, really, isn't it? And now one book to go together. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, you know, honestly, I feel sad because I had not expected this to happen at all. You know, I had never in a million years expected that Lee would ask me to join in with Reacher, let alone to ever take it over on my own. So it was a huge surprise. And it turned into just the best experience ever because, you know, writing is really, really fun. You know, it's amazing to get the opportunity to do something you love and be able to do it for a living. And then to be able to do that with your brother, it's just, you know, I'm pinching myself most days. And so I can't believe that we're already into the final book, you know, because you start on the first one, you want to do as good a job as you can. You want to see what kind of response you get from the book. Then you're onto the next one, then you're onto the next one. And suddenly, yeah, we've just got, you know, we're into the final book now. And yeah, I'll be sad when that phase is finished and it's time to move on my own because, you know, I couldn't think of anything. And I mean, sure enough, maybe if I could be the centre forward for England scoring the winning goal in the World Cup, you know, maybe I would do that instead. But aside from anything like that, then there's nothing in the world I would rather be doing than writing these books with my brother. So it will be a shame when we write the final word in this next book.
Well, I promise not to make any jokes about England's performance at World Cups, but presuming you're talking about the soccer, football. But having said that, I'm a rugby fan and I'm tired of losing to England at the moment as a Wallabies fan. So, look, thanks both of you for sharing that. Lee, you talked a little bit about your childhood, and it was a bit sort of, I guess, at times for you a bit suffocating and repressive, I think is a word you've used before around that, and you found solace in books too. How's that informed your writing, Lee? And then I'm keen to hear from you as well, Andrew, because about the very same thing, because the age gap between you, I think, is at about 14 years, if I'm, or maybe I've got the wrong, but it's about that. So yeah, to you first, Lee.
Yeah, well, I felt that the books are absolutely a lifeline, and I literally can't remember a time that when I wasn't reading, and so I'm still reading, and as I said, that the only negative thing about Andrew joining me is that I don't get to read any more of for instance, the Paul McGrath series and so on, which I was loving. And so I don't know what to say about it, really, that, you know, one door opens, another closes in a way. And so for me, the childhood thing was about, yeah, it was oppressive. It was partly the era, you know, Britain was so exhausted and ruined, you know, physically and economically post-war. And I was born, you know, well after World War II, 9 years after World War II. And yet I can remember all throughout my first, let's say, 8 to 10 years of life, living in this grey, ruined, shattered society that institutionally was quite oppressive. England is full of the class system. We were living in a very unfashionable, derided Midland city. And your life was essentially predetermined for you, it seemed. You know, the ceiling on your ambitions was very low, and the practical reality of getting out of it was very slim, almost no chance of doing that. So yeah, and then on top of that, as well as the era and the institutional issues, our parents were incredibly repressed and repressive and boring, and they had this kind of fantasy that you know, England should be as it was in the year 1900 rather than the 1960s, and everything was negative and everything was disapproved of. So it became it was a tough life emotionally. But then, you know, Andrew coming along, as you say, 14 years later than me, so that by the time he was sort of sentient as a little toddler, I was basically an adult and on my way out the door. But I did sense, yeah, this kid is like me. And I felt bad about, you know, leaving for my adult life, leaving him to go through what I'd been through. And so we were allies from an incredibly young, he was incredibly young, but we were sort of allies together. I remember literally, he was probably about 5 or 6 or something like that, in trouble for something. And I stuck up for him and fixed the problem or whatever. And I told him, I'll watch your back. And he piped up, this little 6-year-old, and said, and I'll watch your back. And we have ever since.
Andrew, how about you?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I probably wasn't much used back in those days, but I remember the sentiment was there anyway. But yeah, I mean, I guess my sort of overwhelming feeling from childhood was just a sort of desperation to get out, like being a cork in a champagne bottle, just feeling this urge to escape. I remember being a little kid, and when you're a kid and sometimes you hear phrases and expressions, but you don't really understand what they're supposed to mean. I heard somebody complaining about being homesick. And I thought, well, yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. I'm totally sick of being at home too. I want to get away and go somewhere better. And so everything, I remember as a tiny kid, I would dream in a dream. Sometimes when you wake up from a dream, it takes a little while to realize what was the dream. And, I'd wake up dreaming that I was somewhere else. I'd be at my grandparents' house, or I'd be on holiday or something. And I'd wake up all happy. And then I'd like, oh no, that was only a dream. I'm still at home. It's desperate to get out. And one of the things was that Lee had kind of blazed that trail. He had shown that you could get out, and not only could you get out, but you could escape reasonably intact, and you could have a really fun life. And so maybe it was easier for me in a way, because I had an example of the thing that I wanted, and it showed that it was possible. So I'm sure it was easier for me, really. Plus, by then our parents were a lot older. They'd kind of lost interest. I was the fourth kid. I was obviously there by mistake, so they kind of left me to get on with things on my own a little bit more. Some of the kind of luster had worn off that crazy fantasy they had about the 1900s. So I kind of escaped from the wreckage. But yeah, the whole time it was all about how soon can I get out of here? And I didn't waste a day when I finally could.
I'm actually the youngest of four kids as well, and very close with my eldest brother. There's a 9-year gap, and I'm incredibly inspired by him as well. So it's really nice hearing you two talking about, reflecting about each other too. But let's get back to the books, because there's always I think in good crime thrillers, there's something else in them inside the plot, and whether it's some sort of deeper meaning, and whether in No Plan B, you've got some, I guess, commentary around maybe the corruption, lack of transparency in private prison system in America. When you're working on these books, how important is, I guess, those comments around society and the world as we see now, and some of the issues that we face? Lee, I'll go to you first.
Well, I've always tried to avoid doing it in your face. These are not polemics dressed up as novels. They're not academic works trying to solve the problem of society in the form of a novel. But you do have to have something that animates the character. And Reacher himself is a person with a very strong sense of what is right and what is wrong. And so he is capable of looking at anything and saying, is this right or is it wrong? And that is the same as Andrew and me, that, I'm not an especially political person. I don't campaign. I don't get involved in stuff like that. But politically, with a small p, of course, yeah, there are things that annoy me like crazy, just annoy the hell out of me, and things that are definitively wrong. And the thing about Reacher is that you can rely on him to have the same reaction. So there are things in society all around the world, but particularly in the US at the moment, that you think, yeah, this is disgraceful. And privatizing prison is a fashion. Partly it is about the neoliberal thing about nothing should ever be run by the state. It's always better if it's run by a private contractor, which is patently not true, and is patently a thin excuse just for shoveling public money into turning it into private wealth. These people run these things as a business. They have shareholders. All they care about is the profit they make. They don't care about the purposes of imprisonment, which should include rehabilitation and various things like that. So yeah, there's this low-level sense of disgruntlement about situations like that. And so when we sat down to think about the book, you know, that sort of thing is on our mind. And so to animate research, we need something like that. Doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world. Doesn't have to be some huge issue. It just has to be, it has to humanize the character in the sense that, yeah, a rational person would get annoyed by this. And if you are Reacher himself, then you can go and do something about it, which is a tremendously satisfying feeling. You know, you do feel like you're putting the world to rights, even though it's fiction and even though it's just on the page.
How about you, Andrew? I mean, I guess with the Reacher books specifically, but you know, you've been a writer for a long time as well. So how do you feel about that as an issue, but I guess specifically with the Reacher novels?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lee summed it up really well. And what we try to do, you know, to sort of expand on that is, you know, sure that there could be an issue along the lines of, you know, you've got this environment where people are, you know, put in prison, and that is a source of income for people. There are some issues there that you can explore, but what we were really doing more than that was looking at the dynamics between the people involved, you know, the bosses at the jail and the inmates. You know, so here is a situation where one group of people has power over another group. You know, what do they do with that power? Do they exercise it in a fair and just way, or do they exploit it for their own profit? And are they, you know, mean and cruel along with it? And of course, you know, in real life, if you meet somebody, it doesn't matter the environment, could be where you work, it could be where you live, anywhere. If you come across someone who is a bully, who exploits circumstances, who exploits people who are in a less fortunate situation, you know, for Lee, that is hugely annoying. And if you meet someone like that, you want to see them come unstuck. And if Reacher is the one doing the unsticking, then, you know, they're coming unstuck in a pretty spectacular way. And so, you know, there is satisfaction there. You know, there will be situations in your life that you wish that you could just tear to pieces and set people straight. You can't, because you go to jail, you'd lose your job, could be all kinds of circumstances. Reacher has none of those constraints. He can do all of those things. And because he's reacting to the kind of thing which moves you in the same way, it's almost like he's doing it on your behalf. You know, you feel like he's out there righting the wrongs for you. And I think that makes it particularly satisfying.
Definitely for the reader, yeah, because the reader recognizes the shape of things from their own life. Obviously, private prisons, very few of our readers work in that probably, but everybody works in some kind of corporation or some kind of structured situation. And Andrew is really good at this, at observing the corporate world and the kind of nonsense that the prison owners are spouting in this book, trying to justify what they're doing, trying to look good, is exactly the kind of corporate BS that every single reader suffers in their own life. So they recognize the situation and they look at their boss or their boss's boss. Every single hierarchy has got some total idiot in it, and everybody suffers from it, and they can use Reacher as a proxy for what they want to do. I mean, loads of people, I'm sure, around the world want to go up to the 10th floor, burst into the corporate suites, and shoot somebody in the head. But they can't in real life, but they can let Reacher do it for them.
I love that Reacher is that guy that can take you on that journey, because people continue to make the mistake of underestimating him. And I think you established that really early on with The Killing Floor, and readers obviously grabbed onto that and they loved it. How has the response been from readers? Because I know they're very active in the way they talk in the reading community, and to you, how do you think the response has been to the new collaboration for you guys? Probably start with you, Lee.
I figure that I was apprehensive about it because, yeah, readers love their books. And if you are passionate about a character or passionate about a series, then you claim a sort of ownership. You have total involvement with it. It's your thing. And if it gets messed around with by somebody else, and the first example, of course, that I had to deal with for this was Tom Cruise in the movies. You know, the readers felt totally violated. They felt that the project had been messed around and taken away from them, and they were very, very annoyed about it. So, to be honest, I was anticipating a little bit of that with the collaboration, that this was a change. It doesn't really matter that nobody has waited yet to find out, is it a change for the better or not? It's just something is happening and to their book, and they get very nervous about it. So I was expecting a fair amount of pushback. And actually, it's been extremely isolated. Very few negative comments about it, very few criticisms. Most people have just accepted it because they follow the character, which is kind of what I planned from the very beginning. I did not plan this transition at all, but what I did plan was that this would not be about me. It would not be about any specific title. It would be about the character. What I imagined was that people would walk into a bookstore and they would not say, is No Plan B available yet? They would not say, is the new Lee Child available yet? They would say, is the new Jack Reacher here yet? And that was supposed to be the central proposition. And happily, it did basically work that way. You know, there are hilarious stories I've heard. I heard one from the guy that does the accounts for my agent. He was flying through somewhere and stopped in the airport to buy a book. And in front of him in the queue to pay was a little old lady with the new Reacher book. And the guy couldn't help himself. He kind of nudged her and said, I work for the agent who represents that author. And she said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I work for the agent that represents Lee Child. He writes these books. And the lady said, no, Jack Reacher writes these books. They're Jack Reacher books. And he said, no, they're books. You know, Lee Child writes them. And she said, what? You mean Jack tells him the story and he writes them down? It was a perfect example of what I was aiming for. It's about the character, not about anything else. And so the seamlessness of Andrew taking over the transition and then moving on, the seamlessness seems to work. There's been very little negative reaction.
So how do you feel about that, Andrew, the custodian of Jack Reacher, I guess that makes you?
Yeah, you know, and I felt a huge responsibility because, you know, whichever way I looked, if I looked over one shoulder, there were the millions and millions of Reacher fans all around the world. If I looked over the other shoulder, there was my brother. You know, I could not afford to fail because I did not want to let my brother down. I did not want to let the Reacher fans down. So, you know, there was a huge amount of pressure. But at the same time, what if I'd said no? What if I hadn't done it? You know, back in the pre-COVID days, when you could do book launches in person, I would go to as many of Lee's as possible. And I remember the launch in England for his third book. Okay, so, you know, first book could be a standalone, second book just could be a sequel. By the time the third one comes along, you know, it's starting to look like a series. And somebody in the audience asked the question, how many books are you going to write? How many Reacher books are there going to be? So Lee said there are going to be 21. And so you could see around the room, people almost on their fingers like, okay, so we've got 3, there's going to be 21. Okay, fine, plenty to go. You know, everybody happy. Next year, book 4, same question, same answer, same mental arithmetic going on. People still happy, you know, and that went on and on and on. But then when he was on like book 19, book 20, and the same question got asked and the same answer got given, the temperature in the room just fell. You know, you could see people all around you horrified and heartbroken because they couldn't face this idea of this future without Reacher. And that's very much what I felt when Lee suggested it, because, you know, I'm the oldest Reacher fan in the world. I did not want there to be a world with no Reacher in it, and I certainly didn't want that to be my fault. So, you know, we felt there is the responsibility, there is the possibility that we could have a pushback, you know, within the Tom Cruise type sense. But you know what? It's better to try it and find out than to just be frightened of it and not even give it a go.
You both have mentioned Tom Cruise. Looking at the TV series, there's been a lot of commentary around the TV series. Oh, we got it right. This is the guy to play Reacher. How closely involved in the series, Lee?
I'm a lot more involved than I was with the movies. In principle, I have a rule that I'm good at what I'm good at, and other people are good at other things. And it's stupid of me to look over their shoulder. You know, take an example as small as the actual physical design of the book. You know, the book jacket. A designer designs it, and they send it to me for approval. And they say, what do you think of it? And I say, no, it doesn't matter what I think of it. What do you think of it? You're the graphics designer. You're the one that's clued in. You're the one that has a sense of what is in the market next year when this book comes out. What do you think? Are you happy? And if they say, yeah, then I'm happy. And it was kind of the same with the movies, that even though I did work in television and I know how these things are done, it is far better to let the professionals do their job with minimal interference. So I didn't have all that much to do with the movies other than socially. You know, I would go and hang out and we'd have a good time. But for the TV, for the Amazon streaming seasons, I did have a little bit more to do with it, because actually they wanted me to. You know, they wanted to talk about it all the time and to figure it out and get it right. But I felt that I should learn a lesson. I should be a bit more involved. So I have been a bit more involved with the TV, and yeah, you know, they have got it right. And not only the casting, not just that, even though obviously Alan Ritchson is a wonderful, wonderful Reacher. I mean, really great. But it was more the no holds barred thing. The first season was Killing Floor, basically. And early on in Killing Floor, Reacher fights a guy in his jail cell. And it is a brutal fight. Reacher cheats. He really damages this guy. And to me, in the book, that was completely essential. It absolutely had to be that way in order to define who Reacher was, to define the universe that Reacher was used to and lived in. It was essential to me. So when they started shooting, I kept my eye out for that scene. To me, that was going to make or break. Were they taking this seriously? Were they going to get it right? Did they understand exactly what Reacher needed to do in that moment? And yes, they did. That fight in the TV series is brutal, just as brutal as it was in the book, maybe even more brutal. And so I thought, yeah, they're totally getting this. They're all Reacher fans making it. And so they want to do it right as well. And so I'm thrilled with it. Yeah, I think it's really good. Season 2 is shooting now. And let's hope it continues for many, many years.
Good stuff. Well, look, not surprisingly, we've got a lot of questions from your readers. So I want to try to get to some of those now as well. I might just start with this one from Lynn. Can you imagine Reacher in a big city rather than a small town? So Lee, do you want to take that first and then Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and he has been in, you know, there are books where he's in New York, there are books where he's in London, and it gives you two things, you know, different environment, different problems, different battlefield, essentially. And also it gives you a chance to do Reacher's view of those cities. And for me in particular, bringing Reacher to London, which I think was in the hard way. He comes to London and then goes out into rural England in a mini car, which, you know, the whole idea of Reacher being in London was a sort of bull in a china shop type of thing for me. And it was also a cute technical thing for me, because normally I'm a foreigner writing America as if I was a native. But for those scenes where Reacher was in London, I was a native writing London like a foreigner. And it was a super interesting thing to do from the writing point of view. But yeah, Reacher's been in big cities, and you know, it's the same old jungle to him, just slightly more dense.
Andrew, how about you with the setting for the Reacher books?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more than open to having Reacher in a big city in the future. But, you know, the thing is, we don't really set out in advance to pick the setting and then let the story follow. It's the other way around. You know, we decide what kind of story we want to tell. And then from that, we figure out what a suitable environment would be. And just by chance, the stories that we've wanted to tell in the last few books have involved those smaller, more rural, more deserted places. But in the future, it's quite possible that we'll want to go the other way, and we'll want him back in the city. So can't promise one way or the other, but we're certainly open to it.
Here's a question from Kath. Lee, you've lived in the USA for many years. Do you feel English or American or both?
Or neither. You know, there was a prime minister in England like 2 prime ministers ago, in other words, only a few years ago, called Theresa May. And she was very contemptuous of the idea about being a citizen of the world. She said, being a citizen of the world is like being a citizen of nowhere. And actually, that's what I want. I don't want to belong anywhere. I don't want to feel loyalty to an institution or a country. I want to be left alone, and I want to live how I want to live, without just according to my values, without any kind of patriotism or national values. So what I hope I am, Kath, is neither American nor British. Just me.
Andrew, I know you spend time living in both the US and London as well. How about you? How do you feel on the question of I guess, your home?
Well, you know, as we were saying earlier, we both kind of grew up feeling like we didn't belong. So, you know, the idea of feeling that you belong to a country or a nation, it doesn't really work for me. You know, I've always felt like a bit of an outsider. And, you know, at the moment we live in Wyoming in the United States. And there's a story that I love about Wyoming. It's a very sort of rugged, it's a very individual, it's a very sort of stand on your own 2 feet kind of place. And back in the 19th century, there was this spell where the second sons of British nobility wound up in Wyoming for some reason. They were looking for opportunities in the New World because, you know, the oldest son was going to inherit everything back home. And there was a story about one of these guys. He set up his big ranch. He was trying to recreate his country manor from England, and he hired a guy to run it for him. And he felt that this guy wasn't sufficiently deferential. You know, this guy didn't bow and scrape enough. So the guy calls him into his office and said, "Do you not realize that I am the son of an earl?" And the guy turned to him and said, "Well, this is Wyoming, and so son of an earl or son of a bitch, it's all the same here." And, you know, that's one reason why I like living there. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter who your parents were. The only thing that matters is who you are, what you do, and what you like as a person. So, you know, those are the things that are important to me, really.
One for both of you. This one's from Lorraine Peck, who's actually an Aussie author, as well as being a reader and a fan of your work. She asks, and I'll start with you, Lee, do you read Australian crime writers? If so, which authors are your favourites?
Well, yeah, I mean, so sort of a side fascination for me is how crime writing communities in various nations come up and down. And sometimes that's to do with the circumstances in that nation. For instance, Northern Ireland is following the same rule that South Africa followed, which is that when you've had intense conflict and upset in your community, you don't really put it into crime fiction until a whole generation has passed. And that is certainly true in Northern Ireland and South Africa. Now that the troubles there are somewhat removed in terms of time, the crime fiction communities there are incredibly vibrant. And I don't know what the reason is in Australia, but yeah, Australian crime writing, I think now and for the past several years, and I hate to say this, Tim, but especially from women crime writers, is amazing in Australia. You know, there are some really, obviously Candice Fox, Jane Harper, people like that, but the depth of the bench in Australia right now for a country with a relatively limited population is amazing. I'm all over Australian crime fiction. I think it is some of the best in the world right now.
Yeah, it's really having a bit of a moment right now. I guess we can thank partly Peter Temple, then on to Michael Robotham and Jane Harper for that, who really started making names for themselves on the international stage. How about you, Andrew? Are there any Aussie crime writers that you like?
Absolutely. You know, all the ones that you mentioned there. I think Candice Fox would be my personal favorite, but yeah, I mean, I'm enjoying discovering new ones because, as Lee said, the strength and depth is fantastic. So, you know, congratulations to all the Aussie crime writers out there, and we look forward to reading more of you.
Yeah, good. Thanks. And yeah, you're right. The bench is deep, and there's particularly a lot of great female crime writers, some of which we've talked about. Do either of you have a favourite Reacher book, and why? Start with you, Lee.
I always used to say the next one, because I always felt that it was a kind of arc or a curve. You would go into it on the 1st of September with, you know, just great joy and enthusiasm. There is nothing better than starting a new book than writing that first line, because theoretically, this could be the perfect book. This could be the one that truly, truly nails it. And it never does. You always screw it up somehow. There's always something that's not as good as you want. It's not quite what you imagined it would be. And so I always used to say, the next one, because I haven't screwed it up yet. But if you look back at what I have done, there are a couple that stand out. I mean, there's loads of little scenes or parts that I remember with great affection. But as complete books, I think Killing Floor being the first one, huge sentimental favorite for me, because that was the beginning of it all. And then along the way, I would pick out maybe Gone Tomorrow, because for a technical reason that writers would understand, is that I had a sort of burning idea for that book, but it was right at the beginning. My burning idea that I was so keen on was done after the first couple of chapters, and so the whole rest of the book was just written on a wing and a prayer. But it came out really good. I was very happy with Gone Tomorrow, and but yeah, normally it's always the next one, especially now that Andrew's going to be doing them, because I can just get all the fun without any of the work.
There's that big brother pride again. Andrew, how about you?
Yeah, well, the first, I mean, people often say, want you to name one, and I always cheat and name two. First one has to be Killing Floor. Really just because of the experience of reading it. You know, as we were saying before, you know, when Lee wrote it, the boots were completely on the other feet. You know, I was the one that had a good job and a secure income. Lee was out of work. He'd been fired. He was desperate to find a way to pay his mortgage and feed his family. So when he sent me that manuscript, I have never been more nervous about reading a book in my life than reading that, because if it had been no good, I was going to firstly have to call my brother and say, your book is no good. And secondly, what was I going to do? You know, was I going to send him food parcels? You know, was I going to let him sleep on the floor? Well, you know, so the stakes were so high reading that book. And of course, it turned out to be fantastic, and I didn't need to worry. But I will never forget the feeling of trepidation reading it, and the feeling of relief when it turned out to be brilliant. So that one always. And the other one that I always come back to is Make Me, because, you know, I think over the years, because crime fiction is sometimes dismissed as a genre thing, you know, Lee hasn't had the respect that he deserves for the craft, for the way that he puts the words together and makes them work. And I think Make Me is beautiful. There's some really, as well as all of the classic Reacher stuff, the mystery, the implied questions, the waiting for the answers, the fantastic comeuppance for the bad guys. It's just there's some absolutely beautiful writing in that book too. So I think it's perhaps the most complete Reacher book, in my opinion.
Yeah, Make Me was the one I was going to nominate as my favourite as well. That question was from Will, by the way. I forgot to say that. Thanks so much, everyone, for your questions. Here's a bit more of a technical one. Most Reacher books are written in the third person, but a few are in the first person. And I think one of the three that you've done together as well is in the first person. Can you tell us about that? That's from Robbie.
Robbie, well, yeah, it was, I think instinctively you want to do the first person. I did this, I saw that, I went there, I went here, because that is natural conversation. That's how we talk to each other. That's what we do. When you get home from work, you say to your partner, I did this happened to me. You don't refer to yourself in the third person. So it is, first of all, very natural. It produces a very fast and intimate connection between the reader and the character. It is really ultimately my preference, I think, except that it is limiting in terms of plot. When you are writing a thriller, if you're writing it in the first person, the reader cannot know anything that is not seen through the character's eyes. The reader knows what the character knows and nothing more. If you do it in the third person, you can see around the corner. You can put the reader in a situation where the hero is walking down the street and the reader knows for sure there's a bad guy waiting around the corner. That is tremendous suspense right there. And yet you can't do that in first person. If you yourself don't know what's waiting around the corner. You can only do that in third person. So it becomes a plotting issue. And it's difficult for the Reacher books because there is no plan, there is no outline, nothing is decided. So you've got to make a kind of instinctive gamble at the beginning. Are you going to do it first person or third person? And if you have a feeling in the back of your mind, you mentioned Make Me, and I remember writing that book where it starts out with somebody else's point of view. It starts out with the bad guys burying somebody they just killed. And that produces all the questions. It prompts all the suspense in the book. Could not be done in first person. It has to be third person for that. So I think naturally, generally, for thrillers as a whole, or for crime fiction where you need to have the detectives on the one hand, the villains on the other hand, you do need the third person so you can have that alternate point of view.
Andrew?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Again, I think my personal preference would be first person if it's possible to tell the story that way. But we never set out at the beginning by saying, shall we do a first person story or a third person story? We always start out by saying, what kind of story do we want to tell? And when we've decided what kind of story we want to tell, that itself determines the choice of how we do it. And so I guess it's probably 2/3, 1/3, third person versus first over the whole series. So yeah, it's just entirely a product of what the story needs in order to tell it to the maximum effect.
Now, I've only got time for a couple more. One of them is mine, which we'll finish on, which I'm really getting nervous about asking. But the first one I've got to ask is just for Lee. What is it like having a biography written about you? Or a few, I should say.
It felt weird to me because, I'm just an artisan. I make things that people are going to find useful and hopefully enjoy. And I didn't feel that I was worth a biography. I didn't think it was important. But the one was written and I loved it, to be honest. It was partly because it was reminded me of things in my life that I'd sort of forgotten. And in particular, other people that were commenting on me, old friends, people that I knew in the past, it was like revisiting them, and they had very nice things to say, which I was very touched by. So yeah, all in all, I would recommend it. Yeah, get a biography written of you. I mean, seriously, I think it would be a great thing, a seriously great thing, if everybody wrote a family story, just recounting the history of their family. My grandma did this, my dad did that, because all of that is lost to history. Immediately those people die. And it would be lovely to know more about our world as a whole, our society as a whole, and particularly our families as a whole. So I think everybody should write at least a couple of pages about what they remember of their family stories, and where did that chair come from? The time we bought that car or whatever. Everybody should write that stuff. It would be fascinating.
Yeah, that question was from Fran. So thanks, Fran, for that. Now, to my last question, the nervous one. Have you guys spoken about how it all ends?
Well, we haven't, because the Andrew taking over prevented it ending first time out. And so what we're looking at now is, that is now Andrew's decision down the road, and he will have to either find a way of ending it or find another family member to carry on. Andrew has a daughter, actually, who, when she was little, I used to think she was just like me. So you never know, anything could happen.
Andrew?
Well, that my daughter that Lee's talking about, when she was pretty small, she was at school, and I got called into the school one day because there was some kind of a problem with her work. So I went in to see what it was all about. And the teacher said to me, well, what happened was we set this writing exercise and we told the kids that there had to be a good character, a bad character, some conflict, and a resolution. So I thought, okay, sounds fine. What was the problem? And they said that my daughter wrote a story about two rabbits. I think they were twins, these rabbits. There was a good twin and a bad twin. The good twin had some nice carrots. The bad twin stole them. So the other rabbit killed it. And so I'm like, okay, so good character, bad character, conflict, resolution, where's the problem? And they were all upset because of, the violence and whatever. So I just said, well, before you go on, you do understand that her uncle is Lee Child, right? And then the teacher's like, oh, right, in that case, don't worry about it. We totally get it. And so, yeah, I think, if she could sort of channel, some more of that kind of style of conflict resolution, I think maybe we could have somebody to, take Reacher into another decade.
Well, I'm sure the readers and those listening today would be thrilled to hear that there's not only many more Andrew Child, Jack Reacher books to come, but it might get passed on further through the family. But look, it's been fantastic talking to both of you. Congratulations on a wonderful collaboration on the great character of Jack Reacher as well. And good luck with the writing.
Thank you, Tim, and thanks for hosting us.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's been great. And it's actually not that often that a character exists and writes his own books, which Reacher seems to be doing. I loved that story. It's like, no, you've got that wrong. He writes them, which kind of belies the whole question about first and third person. But let's not go there. That was so interesting. It was interesting about so many things about your life, both of you, about your relationship, about how you write, and about Reacher and who he is and how he's kind of a moral conscience in a way, albeit one with very big fists and long legs and good kicks and good shooting as well. Thank you so much. I hope that all the audience will have enjoyed the evening as much as we have. Thank you again, Lee and Andrew, and thank you very much, Tim.